Chapter 13, the Endocrine System, Screencast 2. Now, this screencast is going to focus on the hypothalamus and the pituitary, and we have to look at the two together. Now, the hypothalamus, as I said before, it's a bridge between the nervous system and the endocrine system, and what we have to keep in mind here is it's the homeostatic control center of the brain, and that was introduced in chapter 11. Now, there are some hormones that are releasing or inhibiting hormones that are produced within the hypothalamus. Now, what the hypothalamus really does, it's responsible for monitoring and controlling hormone secretions of the pituitary gland. Now, the pituitary is thought of as the master gland. It secretes 8 different hormones that are responsible for regulating other endocrine organs. So we quite often will describe those hormones as tropic. Now, there are 2 lobes of the pituitary, the posterior and the anterior is far more complicated than the posterior. Now, if we look at the hormones that are produced by the posterior pituitary, we have antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin. Now, the anterior to pituitary hormone is producing adrenocorticotropic hormone, or ACTH, thyroid-stimulating hormone, TSH, follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, luteinizing hormone, prolactin, and growth hormone. So one thing that you might want to be comfortable with are the actual actions of these hormones. And on the exam, I would probably ask these through matching of one of 2 ways. I would ask, what organ does this hormone come from, or what is the action or primary function of that particular hormone? So something to keep in mind as we go through. But this table is really talking about all of the hormones that are secreted by both the posterior pituitary and the anterior pituitary. Now, the connection between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary is actually a neural connection. It is not a vascular connection. So the hormones ADH and oxytocin are actually produced within the hypothalamus and transported down axons into the posterior pituitary. Antidiuretic hormone, or ADH, it actually conserves water in the kidneys and plays a major role in the regulation of water balance in our body. Oxytocin, that's actually responsible for uterine contractions during labor and the actual ejection of milk through a neuroendocrine reflex. Here we can actually see that reflex for the most part. So nursing is stimulated. Okay, so there's nerve receptors within the nipple of the breasts. Now, sensory and spinal nerves are going to carry impulses to the neuroendocrine cells of the hypothalamus. They're going to release oxytocin when stimulated. Oxytocin is transported by the blood to the mammary glands, and milk is ejected. So this is the neuroendocrine loop in how oxytocin is working. Now, the anterior pituitary is producing 6 key hormones. As noted, it's controlled by the hypothalamus, and the connection between the anterior pituitary and the hypothalamus is a vascular connection. So releasing inhibiting hormones come from the hypothalamus. They travel to the pituitary through the vascular pituitary portal system. The release of each anterior pituitary hormone is controlled to some degree by the hypothalamus because of these releasing and inhibiting hormones. Now, the hormones of the anterior pituitary are ACTH. That's going to stimulate the adrenal cortex to release glucocorticoids, primarily cortisol. TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, that acts on the thyroid and is responsible for the release of thyroid hormone. FSH and LH are usually called as the gonadotropins. They're responsible for stimulating growth, development, and function of the ovaries and testes. And these hormones are not produced until about puberty onset, the age of 10 to 13. The increase in production of these hormones is responsible for the initiation of sexual maturation and the development that occurs at puberty. prolactin, that is responsible for stimulating development of mammary glands and milk production. Growth hormone has a very widespread effect on the body. Targets include bone, muscle, and the majority of the growth promoting effects that are attributed with growth hormone actually occur during childhood and adolescence. Here we can basically look at overall how this is actually working. Okay, so I've got different groups of neuroendocrine cells in the hypothalamus, and they're releasing either inhibiting or releasing factors. Here's the portal flow. So as I said, there is a vascular connection between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary. So that portal system carries the releasing and inhibiting hormones directly to the anterior pituitary. And each pair of releasing and inhibiting hormones controls the secretion of one anterior pituitary hormone into the general circulation. So here we see the 6 hormones of the anterior pituitary and their actual targets. Now, there are some disorders, that are associated with either hypersecretion or hyposecretion of hormones coming from this pituitary. One of the things that I want to point out here, diabetes insipidus. This is not diabetes mellitus, which we will be looking at in a little bit later. Now, hyposecretion of ADH results in an inability to conserve water appropriately, and this is going to cause excessive urination, thirst, and dehydration. Now, gigantism, this is hypersecretion of growth hormone in childhood. Acromegaly, this is excessive growth hormone over a long period in adults. And then we have pituitary dwarfism, and this is actually hyposecretion of growth hormone. And this can actually be treated through the administration of growth hormone throughout childhood. Here we can actually see the abnormality of gigantism.